In the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, Logan slides a quitclaim deed and plays a doctored clip of me rambling. "We're protecting the family," he says, tapping a bogus notary stamp. My bronze star, shiny souvenirs, is already pawned. My VA pension quietly rerouted to Keene Family Management LLC. 24 years keeping lines open, recast as senility to be managed. I press record and make a vow. Every lie will pay interest. When your own blood breaches the wire, what rules do you keep? My name is Marshall Keene. I am 54 years old. For 24 of those years, I was Sergeant Marshall Keene, United States Army, Signal Corps. My world was one of structured logistics, clear chains of command, and missions with defined objectives. I served in Kuwait during Desert Shield, later in Bosnia, and my final tours were in the dust and data streams of Iraq and Afghanistan. My service earned me a Bronze Star for meritorious achievement, not for valor, but for keeping communications open under impossible conditions, for ensuring the word got through when everything else was failing. It also earned me a pension, a thrift savings plan, and a quiet life in a house I had paid for with time away from my family. I traded years of my son's childhood for this peace, for this financial stability. My sacrifice was meant to be the foundation upon which he could build a better life, not the quarry from which he would pilfer stones to pave his own path to ruin. After I retired, I brought the discipline of the military into my civilian life. It was the only way I knew how to operate. My life ran on a series of spreadsheets and binders. One Excel file, meticulously maintained, tracked every cent of my pension inflows, my TSP drawdowns, and the cost of living adjustments the VA granted. This was not a hobby. It was my operational budget, the financial bedrock that ensured I would never be a burden to anyone, especially not my son, Logan. When he would float the idea of a pension advance, a casual suggestion that I could get a lump sum to help him with some fleeting business idea, I would point to the spreadsheet. The plan was the plan. Deviations create vulnerability. In a fire-labeled binder, I kept hard copies of every essential document. My DD-214, my discharge orders, the VA award letters that quantified my service into a monthly deposit. Every January, I conducted a full review, updating beneficiary designations, ensuring every I was dotted, every T crossed. It was a ritual of self-reliance. I reconciled my bank accounts monthly, checking, brokerage, the VA direct deposit account, and any anomaly, no matter how small, was flagged and addressed within 24 hours. This was my perimeter. This was my defense. My relationship with Logan, and by extension his wife, Tessa, was the one area where my discipline failed me. I think in a part of me I did not want to inspect too closely. I was trying to compensate for the lost time, the birthdays missed, the parent-teacher conferences attended only by his mother. I wanted to be the father who provided, the one who could solve problems. So when Logan came to me with his first real ask, I saw it as an opportunity, not a threat. He was starting a business, he said, a small tech consultancy. He just needed a little help, a bridge to get him to his first big contract. It began with me abandoning my own plan to refinance my home at a lower rate. The bank needed to see pristine credit, and my son's urgent request required me to act as a co-signer on a $20,000 line of credit. He called it a business bridge loan. I called it a demonstration of faith. I signed the papers. The first sign of trouble came not from a bank statement, but from Tessa's social media. Pictures of a vacation I did not know they were taking, a new high-end television mounted on their apartment wall. I checked the line of credit activity online. Over $6,000 had been spent not on business equipment, but on airfare, resort fees, and electronics. When I confronted Logan, he was dismissive, saying it was a necessary expense to court a client. The client never materialized. The payments stopped. To protect my own credit, I had to pay $10,000 to settle the debt and close the line. The damage was done. My credit utilization spiked to 48%. The bank denied my mortgage refinancing application. It was the first time I realized my support was not being used as a foundation, but as a consumable. Requests began to escalate, cloaked in the language of family emergency. One frantic call came late on a Tuesday. It was Tessa. Logan was in the hospital, she said. A sudden medical issue. They needed $3,000 immediately for the copay. I did not hesitate. I made a withdrawal from my health savings account, my own fund for medical emergencies, and transferred the money. 2 weeks later, while helping them bring in groceries, a piece of mail fell from Tessa's purse. It was a receipt, not from a hospital, but from a high-end cosmetic surgery clinic. The procedure listed was for Tessa. The $3,000 transfer had not been a life-saving measure. It was a vanity project. The withdrawal from my HSA, because it was not for a qualifying medical expense of my own, triggered a $360 tax penalty at the end of the year, another small, sharp financial punishment for my trust. The pattern solidified when they lost their apartment. I offered them my home for a rent-free 6-month stay while they got back on their feet. It was my sanctuary, a place of quiet order. They treated it like a temporary camp. The HVAC system ran constantly, windows left open in the dead of winter. The water bill went unpaid for 3 months. When they finally moved out, I was left with delinquent utility notices totaling over $5,000 and a 27-point drop in my FICO score because the bills were in my name. The exploitation of my goodwill bled into the exploitation of my skills. I had always prepared my own taxes, a point of pride. Logan, knowing this, asked for my help with his. He presented me with a shoebox of receipts and a story of financial confusion. I spent a weekend organizing his deductions, creating a clear and honest return, trying to teach him the principles of financial responsibility. I did it for free, another investment in his future. What he failed to mention were the 2 1099 forms from freelance jobs he had conveniently forgotten to include. 6 months later, I received a letter from the IRS. It was not addressed to Logan. It was addressed to me. Because I had prepared his return, the mismatch in reported income triggered an audit of my own finances. The process was invasive and stressful. In the end, I was forced to pay a $2,050 penalty, plus the fee for a CPA to clean up the mess. My attempt to teach him order had dragged me into his chaos. The final creeping violation was the credit card. After the supposed medical emergency, Tessa had suggested it would be wise for Logan to be an authorized user on one of my cards, strictly for emergencies. I agreed, setting a low limit. The emergencies, it turned out, were monthly occurrences, a luxury nursery set for a baby that was not yet on the way, bundles of streaming services I had never heard of, tickets to sporting events. The charges crept up month after month, masked by the autopay feature I had set up. When I finally sat down and did a full manual reconciliation, I found nearly $3,000 in unauthorized spending. I disputed the charges with the credit card company. After a lengthy investigation, they credited back only $1,300. The rest was my loss. The true breaking point, the one that shattered the last remnants of my paternal denial, was not about money. It was about honor. My medals, including my Bronze Star, were kept in a glass-top display case in my study. They were not trophies of war. They were reminders of sacrifice, of friends who did not come home, of the oath I had upheld. Logan asked to borrow them. He said his son's school was having a Veterans Day presentation, and he wanted to show the children what his father had earned. I felt a surge of pride. Perhaps he finally understood. I packed them carefully and gave them to him. A week later, they were not returned. When I asked, Logan was evasive. He said they were safe. That night, a nagging feeling, an old instinct from my intelligence days, made me do something I had never done before. I typed military medals for sale into a search engine. I scrolled through pages of listings on various resale sites, and then I saw it. A listing on a popular marketplace. The photo was clear. It was my display case. The description listed each medal. Zooming in, I could just make out the engraved nameplate on the case. Sergeant Marshall Keene. The seller's profile was new, but a reverse image search of the profile picture linked to an account belonging to Tessa's cousin. They had not just borrowed my honor, they had monetized it. They had put a price tag on my life's service. The listing price was $2,000. The pawn ticket, as I would later discover, was logged as 74183, with a payout of $1,475. That night, sighed. The father, the man making excuses and hoping for the best, went silent. A cold, quiet clarity washed over me. The grief was a physical thing, a weight in my chest for the son I had lost, or perhaps never truly had. But grief is a luxury you cannot afford when you are under attack. As I sat there, the screen glowing in the dark room, my phone buzzed with an alert from my bank. It was a fraud notification. Unusual activity detected. Your VA pension direct deposit information has been changed. New routing to Keen Family Management LLC. They had not just pawned my past. They were now trying to steal my future. They were trying to cut my supply lines. I looked at the forged power of attorney document the bank had attached to the email. The signature was a clumsy imitation, the slant all wrong. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a hostile action. An enemy had breached the wire. The man who had spent 24 years defending positions and securing assets looked at the screen, and the dormant tactician awoke. My home was no longer just a house. It was an area of operations. My son was no longer my son. He was a hostile actor. My retirement was no longer a time of peace. It was a campaign to be fought and won. I closed the Marketplace tab. I opened a new spreadsheet, the one I used to track my finances. I saved it under a new name, Operation Checkmate. The mission had just begun. The rules of engagement had changed, because they had made it clear there were no rules. They just made one critical mistake. They forgot who they were dealing with. They mistook my paternal love for weakness. They were about to learn, in the most precise and painful way possible, the difference between a father and a sergeant. The father in me died in front of that glowing monitor. In his place, the sergeant stood relieved of duty. There was no rage, no shouting into the empty house. There was only the quiet, efficient hum of a machine switching on. My grief was a resource I could not afford to expend. The situation had been redefined. This was not a family crisis. It was a theater of operations. Logan and Tessa were no longer my son and daughter-in-law. They were hostile combatants who had launched an unprovoked attack on my sovereignty. Their objective was clear: the complete annexation of my assets and autonomy. My objective, therefore, was equally clear: to defend my territory, neutralize the threat, and re-establish the perimeter. The military mind, dormant for years, came online with a chilling familiarity. The first principle of any engagement is to know your enemy. The time for assumptions was over. The time for intelligence gathering had begun. Move was to sanitize my own communications. My home network, my personal email, my phone. I had to assume they were all compromised, or at least monitored. I drove to the public library downtown, a place of anonymity, and used one of their terminals to create a new, sterile email account with a provider I had never used before. The username was a random string of letters and numbers linked to nothing. This became my new command post. From this secure channel, I began the digital reconnaissance. I started with their social media, but I was not looking at their happy, curated photos. I was performing a forensic analysis. I downloaded every picture Tessa had posted in the past year, running the metadata through an online tool. GPS coordinates, timestamps, camera models. It all painted a picture of their real life, not the one they projected. The emergency medical procedure coincided with a geotagged photo at a luxury spa, not a hospital. The expensive dinners, the new car I had suspected was theirs, a late model SUV, it was all there, documented by their own hubris. I mapped their network of friends and associates, creating a link analysis chart on a fresh sheet of paper, just as I had done for insurgent networks in Kandahar. Names, connections, frequency of interaction. A key node quickly emerged: Tessa's cousin, the one whose profile I had linked to the sale of my metals. And next to him, another name, frequently tagged in their social events, a woman who listed her profession as a mobile notary public, a new variable. This was not random, it was coordinated. Next, I turned my attention to the financial front. I logged into my bank account, not through the main portal, but through a back-end access page for developers I found with a specific Google search. It was less user-friendly, but showed more data. I pulled the full details on the fraudulent ACH transfer. The request to change my VA pension deposit had been submitted via an online form, and the bank system had logged the IP address of the device that submitted it. I copied the string of numbers. A quick search on a public IP lookup tool confirmed my suspicion. The address was registered to an internet service provider in Logan City. The location was a residential address, his address. It was the digital equivalent of finding the enemy's footprint inside the wire. I requested the full PDF of the forged power of attorney they had sent the bank. I printed it at the library and examined it under a cheap magnifying glass I bought at the pharmacy next door. The signature was sloppy, the pressure uneven, but the notary stamp was the real prize. It looked official. But details matter. I went to the Secretary of State's official website and used their public search tool for notary commissions. I entered the serial number from the stamp on the forged document. The result came back instantly. No commission on record for this number. The stamp was a fake. It was a clean piece of evidence. Hard, undeniable proof of a felony.
Physical reconnaissance was next. I needed to understand their daily patterns, their routines. For 3 days, I became a ghost. I would park my car 2 blocks from their apartment building in the early morning and just watch. I noted the time Logan left for work, the car he drove, the same new SUV from the photos. I noted Tessa's comings and goings, the trips to the gym, the expensive coffee shops, the boutiques. I saw the deliveries arrive, meal prep services, high-end clothing brands, electronics. Their life of quiet desperation was funded by a river of debt and my stolen capital. This was their key vulnerability. They were living far beyond any legitimate means, addicted to a lifestyle they could not sustain. Their entire existence was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies. I drove by the pawn shop listed on the marketplace site. It was in a seedy part of town. I did not go in. I did not need to.
I had the online listing, the pawn ticket number from my later investigation, and the connection to Tessa's cousin. It was another piece for the file. Human intelligence was the final piece of the puzzle. I could not risk talking to them or their friends directly. My questions would raise alarms. But people talk. I called a former neighbor, an old friend from my street who had moved to a condo in the same complex as Logan. I kept the conversation light, catching up, talking about retirement. I casually steered the conversation. "Heard Logan is doing great with his new business venture," I said, a simple, open-ended statement. The line went quiet for a moment. "That's the story he's telling," the neighbor said, his voice laced with skepticism. "All I know is they were 3 months behind on their condo fees until last week. Paid it all off in cash. Tessa told my wife they landed a huge government contract. Sounded fishy to me." A government contract. Another lie, designed to create a public narrative of success, to mask the source of their sudden cash infusion. My cash. Back in my study, surrounded by my notes, I laid it all out. The digital evidence, the financial tracks, the physical observations, the human intelligence. I had a complete picture of the enemy. I analyzed their vulnerabilities, not as a father, but as a strategist. Their greatest weakness was their financial dependency. They were drowning in high-interest debt and their only lifeline was me. Their second weakness was their social reputation. Tessa's curated online persona and Logan's desperate need to appear successful were critical to their self-worth. An attack on this front would be disorienting. Their third and most critical vulnerability was their legal exposure. They had committed multiple felonies: identity theft, wire fraud, forgery. This was my trump card, the ace I would not play until the final hand. I saw their emotional pressure points too. The deep-seated resentment, the guilt they masked with aggression. I would not use these to play mind games. I would use them to predict their behavior when the pressure mounted. The final step was to formulate a plan, a course of action. I wrote it down on a fresh sheet of paper. A simple, 3-phase operational plan. Phase 1. Financial isolation. I would systematically cut off every source of funding they had siphoned from me, but do it quietly, creating a financial drought that they would not immediately trace back to me. Phase 2. Evidence consolidation. I would take every piece of intelligence and harden it into irrefutable evidence, collaborating with legal and financial professionals to build an airtight case. Phase 3. The decisive engagement. I would choose the time and place to confront them, not with anger or accusations, but with the cold, hard facts of their crimes. in a setting that would maximize the consequences and neutralize their ability to respond. The timeline would be short. The execution would be precise. My mission objectives were clear. 1. Secure all personal and financial assets beyond their reach. 2. Create an undeniable record of their criminal actions. And 3. Reclaim my honor and peace. There would be no more warnings. No more second chances. The ledger of their exploitation was closed. The intelligence was gathered. The battle was about to begin. The shift from intelligence gathering to active deployment was seamless. There was no ceremony, no moment of dramatic decision. It was simply the next logical step in the operational sequence. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. Phase 1, Financial Warfare, began at 0900 hours on a Monday morning.
I did not fire a shot across their bow. I mined their harbor in the dead of night. My first call was not to an attorney, but to my contact at the bank's fraud prevention unit. I presented my case with the calm, methodical precision of a field report. I provided the forged power of attorney, the fake notary stamp serial number, the IP address trace from the ACH transfer request. I did not yell. I did not demand. I presented facts. The fraud agent, a woman named Miss Albright, was quiet for a moment. "Sergeant Keene," she said, a voice crisp and professional. "This is one of the most well-documented cases of elder financial abuse I have seen in a long time. We are freezing the destination account, Keene Family Management LLC, immediately. All funds will be reversed to your primary account within 24 hours. We are also flagging your son and his wife's profiles in our system." It was the first domino. They would not know the pension reroute had failed until the deposit failed to appear. Next, I addressed the credit card. I did not simply cancel Logan's authorized user card. I called the credit card company and reported every single unauthorized charge from the past 6 months as fraud. I had my spreadsheet ready with dates, vendors, and amounts. I explained the situation calmly, that my son had been given the card for emergencies and had abused that trust. Because I had a long history with the company and a perfect payment record, they agreed to open a full investigation and issued a provisional credit for the entire disputed amount of $2,900. They FedExed me a new card with a new number overnight. Logan's card would simply be declined the next time he tried to use it for his morning latte or to fill up the gas tank of his new SUV. A small, irritating disruption. A sign that the river was drying up. I then contacted the 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I instituted a full credit freeze on my files. This would prevent any new lines of credit from being opened in my name, effectively cutting off their ability to use my identity for further financial leverage. It was a simple preventative measure, a digital wall around my financial identity. The final step in this initial phase was to deal with the utilities at my house, which were still in my name from their disastrous rent-free stay. I paid the outstanding balances in full, all $5,120. Then I had the services shut off, the water, the gas, the electricity. The accounts were closed. If they were planning on trying to squat in my property again, they would find it cold and dark. Each of these actions was quiet, invisible. They were financial landmines, set to detonate only when my adversaries tried to access resources they no longer controlled. Phase 2 was the reputation strike. This required a more delicate touch. My goal was not to engage in a messy public feud, but to strategically dismantle the false narrative they had constructed. I started with their social circle, using the network map I had built. I called our old neighbor again, the one in Logan's condo complex. I told him the truth, but I framed it as a man seeking advice. "I am in a difficult position," I said. "It seems Logan has been telling people he landed a large government contract. I am concerned because my own financial records show a very different story. A story of significant debt and misappropriated funds from my pension. I'm worried he's running a scam and that good people, like you, might get caught up in it." I knew my neighbor was a notorious gossip. The information would spread through the condo association like wildfire, not as an angry accusation from an estranged father, but as a concerned warning from a credible source. It was a subtle counter-narrative, designed to create doubt and suspicion around Logan's claims of success.
Next, I turned to Tessa's carefully curated online world. I did not engage with her directly. Instead, I created a new anonymous social media profile. The profile picture was a generic landscape. The bio was blank. From this sterile account, I began to strategically comment on the public posts of her friends, the ones I had identified in my network analysis. On a photo of Tessa showing off a new designer handbag, I left a simple public comment. "Is that from the Emergency Medical Fund?" asking for a veteran. On a post from one of their friends praising Logan's business acumen, I commented, "Is that the same business acumen that led to a defaulted loan and a $10,000 bailout from his retired father?" The comments were factual, they were specific, and they were public. I did not accuse or insult. I simply introduced documented facts into their fictional world. I then took the online listing for my medals and sent the link, anonymously, to the administrator of a large online community for military veterans and collectors. My message was simple. This seller is attempting to profit from the stolen valor of a decorated veteran. The name on the case is Sergeant Marshall Keene. Please investigate. I knew the veteran community would be ferocious in its response. They are a self-policing tribe with a deep and abiding hatred for those who steal or disrespect military honors. Within hours, the listing was flooded with angry comments. The seller's account was reported dozens of times. The marketplace, under pressure, shut the listing down and suspended the seller's account. Phase 3 was psychological operations. My goal was not to terrorize, but to create a sense of unease, of being watched. I wanted them to feel the same vulnerability they had tried to impose on me.
I knew they were expecting a confrontation, an angry phone call, a shouting match. I gave them silence. I did not respond to their texts or calls. I let them wonder what I knew. Then, I sent a single, sterile email from my new, anonymous account to Logan's work email address. The subject line was the pawn ticket number for my medals, number 74183. The body of the email contained only one thing: a high-resolution photograph of the forged power of attorney document, with the fake notary stamp circled in red. I sent another email to Tessa's personal account. The subject line was the name of the cosmetic clinic. The body of the email was a screenshot of the GPS data from her social media post, showing her at the spa on the day of the supposed medical emergency. I sent no message, no threat, just the data, just the evidence. I wanted them to know that I knew. I wanted them to lie awake at night, wondering what other evidence I had, what my next move would be. I wanted to force them into a defensive posture, to make them paranoid and prone to mistakes. The enemy's response was predictable. It began with a flurry of confused and then angry text messages. "Why isn't the card working? Did you cancel the pension deposit?" Then came the calls, which I let go to voicemail. Logan's messages were a mix of blustering indignation and feigned concern. "Dad, what the hell is going on? People are saying crazy things. Are you okay? Call me back." Tessa's messages were more manipulative, dripping with false sweetness. "Marshall, I hope you're all right. We're worried about you. These anonymous online attacks are just awful. We need to present a united front." They were trying to regain control of the narrative, to pull me back into the familiar dynamic of their manufactured drama. They were treating this as a public relations problem, not as the exposure of a criminal conspiracy. They escalated. A package arrived at my door. It was a basket of expensive fruits and cheeses with a card signed by both of them. "We love you, Dad. Let's talk." It was a classic tactic of an abuser, a small gesture of kindness designed to erase a mountain of cruelty. I left the basket on my porch. I did not touch it. They were making a critical error. They were still operating under the assumption that I was the same man they had been manipulating for years. They still thought they could manage my emotions. They failed to realize that the father was gone. They were now dealing with the sergeant. And the sergeant was not interested in talking. He was interested in victory. The mines had been laid. The counter-narratives were spreading. The psychological pressure was mounting. The decisive engagement was next, and I would choose the time and the place. The enemy's counterattack was clumsy, born of desperation. Having failed to re-establish control through manipulation, they resorted to a brute force assault. They misjudged me, believing my silence was a sign of weakness, of a wounded old man licking his wounds in isolation.
They mistook my strategic patience for emotional paralysis. This was the hubris of the amateur, and it would be their undoing. Their first move was an attempt to use their connections. Tessa's father, a man with a minor local political appointment, made a call to the local police department requesting a welfare check on me. He painted a picture of a confused elderly veteran who was being manipulated by an unknown third party, someone who had turned him against his family. It was a clever tactic, an attempt to use the very system I was preparing to engage against them, to frame me as incompetent and unreliable. But I was prepared. My military training had taught me the value of preemptive action. I had already contacted the Veterans Liaison Officer at the local precinct, a former Marine gunnery sergeant named Kowalski. I had given him a brief, professional overview of the situation, providing him with a summary of the financial fraud and the impending legal action. When the welfare check was dispatched, Kowalski flagged the call. He personally accompanied the two responding officers to my door. I welcomed them in, offered them coffee, and presented my case with the same calm demeanor I had used with the bank. I showed them my financial records, the forged documents, the pawn ticket information. The officers, who had arrived expecting to find a disoriented senior citizen, found instead a highly organized, articulate man with a mountain of evidence. They left after 20 minutes, assuring me that a note would be added to my file, clarifying that I was the victim of a targeted financial crime, not a man in need of a welfare check. The attempt to paint me as senile had not only failed, it had backfired, officially documenting their malicious intent with the police. Their next move was an escalation into outright dirty tactics. They tried to leverage the one thing they thought I still cared about, my relationship with my grandchildren. Logan sent me a series of photos of the children, their faces sad, with manipulative captions. They miss their grandpa. They don't understand why you won't see them. He then had his lawyer, a shark from a downtown firm, send me a threatening letter. It was a classic piece of legal intimidation full of baseless accusations of parental alienation and threats of a restraining order to prevent me from seeing the children. They believed this emotional blackmail would break me. It was another grave miscalculation. My love for my grandchildren was a separate issue, a wound I would have to tend to later. Right now, I was in a war. And in a war, you cannot allow the enemy to use your attachments as weapons against you. I forwarded the lawyer's letter to my own legal counsel, Elaine Porter, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in elder law and financial exploitation. I had retained her the week before. Elaine's response was swift and brutal. She sent a cease and desist letter back to Logan's lawyer that not only refuted his claims, but also included a preliminary list of the criminal statutes Logan and Tessa had violated, from wire fraud to forgery. She attached the fake notary's non-existent commission record and the IP trace report. The letter concluded by stating that any further attempts to use the children as leverage would be added to a forthcoming civil suit for damages and emotional distress. The threats stopped immediately. They had fired a legal shot and discovered, to their shock, that I was armed with superior firepower. This was where my military experience gave me an insurmountable advantage. They were reacting emotionally, lashing out with chaotic, impulsive attacks. I was operating on a plan, executing a strategy. They saw a family squabble, I saw a multi-front campaign. While they were busy with welfare checks and threatening letters, I was mobilizing my own network. I contacted my old VFW post. I did not ask for vigilante justice. I asked for something more powerful, witness statements. I spoke to 3 of my closest friends from the post, men who had known me for decades, who had seen my unwavering support for Logan over the years. They wrote signed, notarized statements attesting to my character, my mental acuity, and the long-standing pattern of my son's financial dependency. These were not just character references. They were tactical assets, ready to be deployed to counter any future attacks on my competency. I was building a wall of credibility around myself, brick by evidentiary brick. The perfect storm I had been engineering was about to make landfall, and I chose the time and place with military precision: Thanksgiving. It was their favorite holiday for performative family unity, a stage on which they could showcase their supposed success. Logan had sent a final, conciliatory-sounding text. "Dad, let's put all this behind us. Come for Thanksgiving. We can sort this out. I've even invited a friend who's a notary, just in case we need to sign anything to clear this mess up." The bait was almost laughably obvious. A pop-up notary at Thanksgiving. They were planning a final, coercive strike, likely a quitclaim deed to my house, dressed up as a peace treaty. They were bringing the battle to me, but they were walking into a kill zone of my own design. I accepted the invitation. On Thanksgiving morning, I made my final preparations. I placed a small, high-fidelity audio recorder on the dining room table disguised as a salt shaker. I wore a button camera, a piece of kit from my old private security consulting days. I confirmed the 1,600 hours appointment I had made. At 15:45, as I drove toward their house, I made a final call to Elaine.
"All elements are in position,"
I said.
"Execute."
I arrived at 15:55. The atmosphere was thick with false cheer. Logan greeted me at the door with a strained hug. Tessa hovered in the background, her smile as brittle as glass. The friend, a nervous-looking woman with a notary bag, sat awkwardly on the couch. After a few minutes of excruciating small talk, Logan cleared his throat. "Dad," he began, his voice oozing with false sincerity, "we need to protect you. Protect the family assets." He then pulled out a pre-filled quitclaim deed to my house, and then came his masterstroke. He took out his phone. "I'm sorry it has come to this," he said, "but we have evidence that you're being manipulated, that you're not yourself." He played a video. It was me, in my own kitchen, looking tired and speaking in a halting voice. The audio was cleverly edited, piecing together snippets of conversations, making it sound like I was confused and paranoid. I can't trust anyone. The money, it's all gone." It was a doctored fabrication, designed for emotional shock and awe. "Just sign the deed, Dad," Logan said, his voice now hard. "The notary is here. We'll put the house in an LLC we control. It's the only way to protect it." He slid the deed and a pen across the table. I looked at him, then at Tessa, then at the nervous notary. I took a slow breath. "I will proceed," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Only if you all consent to being recorded for the legal record." Before they could process the request, I reached out and visibly pressed the record button on the salt shaker. "For the record," I stated, "it is 16:02 hours, Thanksgiving Day." Logan's face went pale. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. It was not more guests. It was 2 uniformed police officers and a stern-looking woman from Adult Protective Services. Elaine Porter stood behind them, holding a file. "Logan Keene," Officer Kowalski said, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. "We're here to discuss a forged power of attorney, the fraudulent use of a notary seal, and an attempt to coerce a vulnerable adult. The trap had been sprung. The perfect storm had hit, and they were standing directly in its path." The immediate aftermath of the Thanksgiving confrontation was a whirlwind of controlled, decisive action. While Logan and the fraudulent notary were detained, and Tessa stood in stunned silence as officers confiscated their phones and laptops, my team moved to consolidate our victory and fortify the new reality. This was not about revenge. It was about establishing a permanent, unbreachable peace, built on a foundation of consequences. The complete breakdown of their operation was swift. The pop-up notary, faced with the evidence of her non-existent commission and felony charges, folded within the first hour of questioning. She gave a full confession, implicating Logan and Tessa in a detailed conspiracy to defraud. Tessa's frantic calls to her influential father resulted in a curt political disavowal. He would not touch this toxic, criminal mess. Their carefully constructed world was not just cracking, it was vaporizing. Within days, the financial consequences I had set in motion began to compound. The luxury SUV, which I discovered was leased, was repossessed from their apartment complex in the middle of the day. A humiliating public spectacle. Their credit cards, now carrying the full weight of their profligate spending without my money to pay them off, were declined. I received, through Elaine, reports of bounced checks to their condo association and angry calls from high-end furniture stores seeking payment. They were financially isolated, their supply lines cut, and now they were facing the reality of their self-inflicted siege. The first order of business was to ensure that the emotional and financial manipulation could never take root again, especially concerning my grandchildren, Noah and Lily. They were the innocent casualties in this war, and their future was my responsibility. The following Monday, I met with Elaine Porter and a trust and estate planner. We did not create a simple savings account. We forged a financial fortress called the Noah and Lily Education Trust. I was the grantor, but I appointed an independent third-party corporate trustee, a bank with a century-long reputation for fiduciary duty. This was critical. I wanted a sterile, emotionless entity making the decisions, immune to any future pleading or manipulation from Logan or Tessa. The terms of the trust were explicit. Distributions were limited to documented invoices for tuition, university-approved textbooks, and standardized testing fees. The trustee was legally barred from distributing funds for any other purpose. Logan and Tessa were explicitly named as excluded parties, with no authority to access, direct, or even receive statements about the trust's assets. I funded it with a significant portion of the money I had recovered and would recover from the civil suit. It was their inheritance, the one they so desperately craved, now placed forever beyond their grasp, serving only the future of their children. With the children's future secured, I turned my attention to hardening my own perimeter. The locks on my house were replaced with a smart lock system that logged every entry and could be controlled remotely from my phone. I installed a full perimeter camera system, not just a doorbell cam, but comprehensive coverage of every approach to my property. The feed was stored on a secure cloud server. My physical mail, which they had tried to intercept, was now forwarded to a secure P.O. box at a commercial mail receiving agency. I signed up for the USPS's Informed Delivery Service, which sends me a daily email with a digital scan of every piece of mail before it arrives. Any attempt to intercept my mail would now be immediately flagged. Elaine secured a temporary and later permanent no-contact order against both Logan and Tessa. Any attempt to call, text, email, or approach me would be a direct violation of a court order, resulting in immediate legal consequences. My personal garrison was now fortified. Their desperate pleas began as predicted. Tessa left a long, rambling voicemail on my new phone number, which she must have gotten from a distant relative. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a tearful monologue that never once contained the words, "I'm sorry," but instead was filled with accusations that I had destroyed the family and abandoned them. It was an attempt to trigger the old guilt. I did not feel a thing. I saved the audio file, labeled it with the date and time, generated a SHA-256 hash to verify its integrity, and forwarded it to Elaine with a one-line email. For the file, violation of no contact order. It was not an emotional event. It was a data entry task, but a fortress can be a lonely place. I knew I needed to rebuild my alliances, to replace the toxic family ties with a network of genuine support. I went back to my VFW post. This time, I did not just provide information. I shared my story. I laid out the entire campaign from the initial exploitation to the Thanksgiving gambit. The outrage in the room was palpable. These men understood honor, duty, and betrayal. The post commander, a retired command sergeant major, drafted a formal letter of support on behalf of the entire post, which Elaine filed as a supplemental victim impact statement with the district attorney's office. The VFW's pro bono legal clinic, which normally helped veterans with disability claims, offered to assist with the paperwork to have my stolen medals officially replaced by my branch of service. It was a symbolic gesture, but a powerful one. It was a statement that my honor was not defined by a piece of metal, but by the community that stood with me. The next step was a full financial audit. I hired an independent certified financial planner, a man with a reputation for forensic accounting. I walked into his office with my labeled binder and a USB drive containing my spreadsheets. He looked at my records and nodded slowly. "Sergeant," he said, "in 20 years of doing this, 99% of the cases I see are a chaotic nightmare of shoeboxes and shredded papers. This is a work of art." We spent a week going over 24 months of my financial life. We severed every last link, including an Amazon Prime account they were still piggybacking on. The act of closing it felt ridiculously small, yet monumentally satisfying. We closed dormant accounts and consolidated everything into a series of trust-controlled custodial accounts. My financial life was now as clean and orderly as a barracks inspection. The community watch extended beyond the VFW. I spoke to my immediate neighbors, the ones who had watched my family's drama unfold from a distance. I did not give them all the lurid details, but I explained that there had been a serious security issue involving financial exploitation and that a no-contact order was in place. I asked them to call the police if they saw Logan or Tessa near my property. They readily agreed, and we even set up a neighborhood camera sharing agreement, linking our home security systems to create a wider net of surveillance. Every doorstep confrontation, every attempted visit, would now be discouraged not just by a court order, but by a community of watchful eyes. Finally, I established what I called the paper trail doctrine. Every interaction, every piece of data related to this incident and its aftermath was to be logged, documented, and secured. I began keeping a standardized monthly incident log, noting any attempted contact or unusual activity. All my phone calls with lawyers, banks, and agencies were recorded, with consent. I learned how to create a SHA-256 hash for critical digital documents, a unique digital fingerprint that proves a file, like the doctored video they tried to use against me, has not been altered. This doctrine was my new standard operating procedure. Justice, I was learning, was not an event, but a process. It arrived in sterile envelopes and official emails. Elaine informed me the DA was pursuing multiple felony charges against Logan, citing the mountain of evidence we had provided. The State Board of Notaries had permanently revoked the imposter's license and was pursuing its own fraud charges against her. The marketplace platform that had listed my metals had banned Tessa's cousin and provided his identity to the police, who were now investigating him for trafficking in stolen goods. Each update was another brick in my new foundation. This garrison was not built of anger, but of process and protocol. It was a system designed to make me untouchable, to guarantee a peace they could never again threaten. My alliances were forged in shared values of honor and mutual respect, not the toxic bonds of manipulation and guilt. The teaching moment was over. The new fortified reality was now in place. The war does not end with the final shot. It ends when the new peace is sustainable. My life in the months following the Thanksgiving gambit became an exercise in building that sustainability. It was a life governed by protocol, a system of interlocking defenses that made my personal sovereignty an established fact, not a daily struggle. Every quarter, I have a scheduled review with Elaine Porter. We go over the performance of the trusts, review any communications, and assess for new threats. It is as routine as a dental cleaning and just as vital for preventative health. Annually, I receive a thick compliance packet from the corporate trustee managing the Noah and Lily Education Trust, a sterile, data-rich document confirming every expenditure aligns with the trust's rigid charter. There are no dramatic phone calls, no emotional pleas, just the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine executing its mission. My peace is not a passive state. It is actively managed. My assets, once a source of constant anxiety, are now optimized for stability and quiet growth. The funds recovered through the court-ordered restitution and the liquidation of compromised accounts were not spent or left idle. Following the advice of my CFP, I reallocated the capital into a conservative portfolio designed for income generation, a ladder of U.S. Treasury bonds, and a low-volatility real estate investment trust that focuses on VA loan-backed properties. The target yield is a steady 5.1%. My emergency reserve is no longer a simple savings account. It is a 12-month liquid buffer, untouchable and inviolable. Boundary enforcement has become an automated, emotionless process. Logan's and Tessa's numbers, along with those of their known associates, are on an auto-reject list on my phone and a block filter on my email. The few times they have attempted to circumvent this using new numbers, the voicemails are saved, logged, and the violation is forwarded to the district attorney's office with a simple log ID. The civil suit for restitution proceeded without my direct involvement, a quiet legal maneuver that resulted in a judgment in my favor, garnishing a percentage of Logan's future earnings to repay the approximately $32,000 he had methodically stolen. This is not a conversation. It is a mathematical certainty. Logan and Tessa was not a single dramatic event, but a slow, grinding collapse. The public vindication I sought came not through headlines, but through the quiet, irrefutable finality of the legal system. Faced with our mountain of evidence, the forged documents, the IP traces, the confession of the fake notary, and the testimony from Adult Protective Services, the DA offered Logan a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony financial elder abuse. He avoided a lengthy prison sentence, but the consequences were disproportionate to anything he had imagined. His felony conviction is a permanent mark on his record, making future employment difficult. The court ordered full restitution, the amount to be garnished from any wages he earns for the next decade. He was sentenced to 500 hours of community service, which, in a moment of poetic justice, the judge assigned him to perform at a local veterans support center, cleaning floors and serving meals to men like me. He was also mandated to attend court-ordered therapy to address what the judge called his pathological sense of entitlement. Tessa, while avoiding direct criminal charges, faced a different kind of reckoning. Her social network, built on a foundation of lies and projected wealth, evaporated overnight. The friends who had admired her designer handbags and lavish vacations wanted nothing to do with the wife of a convicted felon who had stolen from his own father. Her carefully curated reputation was destroyed. I heard from my old neighbor that she was forced to take a job as a cashier at a grocery store, the harsh fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the soft glow of the spas she used to frequent. Her father, the local politician, publicly disavowed them, issuing a statement about the importance of respecting one's elders. They lost their condo and were forced to move into a small, run-down apartment across town. The most significant victory for me was the reclamation of my medals. The police recovered most of them from the pawn shop, but the bronze star was gone, already sold to an anonymous online buyer. Through the VFW's legal clinic, I formally applied for a replacement set. Months later, a small official box arrived. Opening it, I felt a sense of closure that surprised me. My honor was never in their hands. It had always been mine. Now, the symbols of that honor were back where they belonged. Reconciliation was a concept I did not entertain for a long time. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too absolute, but the new reality I had built was strong enough to allow for new possibilities on my terms. Nearly a year after the sentencing, Elaine received a letter from Logan's court-appointed therapist. It included a letter from Logan himself. It was different from his previous communications. It was stark, humbled, and devoid of excuses. He detailed his crimes without minimizing them. He acknowledged his resentment, his jealousy, and the weakness he had mistaken for strength. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked if, one day, under supervised conditions, he might be allowed to reintroduce himself to his children's grandfather. The request was not for him. It was for Noah and Lily. After a long conversation with Elaine, I agreed. We met in a public park, halfway between my house and his new apartment. The first meeting was just 15 minutes. He looked older, tired. He apologized, and for the first time, I believe he meant it. He did not say, "I'm sorry for what happened." He said, "I am sorry for what I did. I stole from you, I lied to you, and I dishonored you and our family." I did not offer forgiveness. I simply nodded and laid out the new terms. All future contact would be scheduled through a third-party parenting coordinator. Visits with the children would happen twice a month at the park or the library, never at my home. There would be no discussion of money, the past, or our relationship. The conversations would be about the children and nothing else. It was not a reconciliation of a father and son. It was the establishment of a new, functional, and heavily fortified diplomatic relationship for the sole benefit of the grandchildren. My mission now is one of legacy. My personal battle had taught me a universal lesson about the nature of respect, the necessity of boundaries, and the quiet strength of strategic discipline. It is a lesson I feel compelled to share. At the VFW post, I worked with the commander to create a simple one-page document we call the Holiday Deed Scam Checklist. It lists red flags for financial exploitation, manufactured emergencies, pressure to sign documents without legal review. the sudden appearance of a friendly notary. We distribute it at every post meeting. I filed a formal statement with the National Veterans Hall, not to boast, but to place my story on the public record as a case study in defense against elder abuse. My greatest satisfaction, however, comes from the quiet, official correspondence I receive from the Noah and Lily Education Trust. Last month, I received the first semi-annual report. It included a copy of a disbursement check for $420 for Noah's standardized test registration fees, and a receipt for $380 for Lily's required school textbooks. The trustee confirmed that the parents had no access to or control over the transaction. This was the ultimate victory. The money they had tried to steal for their own selfish desires was now being used precisely as intended, to build a future for the next generation, a future they cannot touch. My life is quiet now, but it is not empty. It is a structured peace, earned through a difficult campaign. I have learned that strength is not about anger or confrontation, but about the relentless, disciplined application of process. Honor is not something that can be pawned. It is the sum of your actions. And true peace is not the absence of enemies, but the presence of unbreachable walls, and the knowledge that you have the strength and the strategy to defend them.